All right, verb systems. I'm not talking about how to conjugate verbs, although I'll kind of get that back door a little bit. I'm more talking about the idea of verbs and their time. All right. In Latin, we have two classes of verbs. Two classes of verbs. So I'm going to put on the right-hand side our primary verbs. Primary verbs. And I'm going to put on the left side of the board our secondary verbs, or often called the historical class verbs. Okay. Primary verbs talk about future realities, or pardon me, present or future realities. And primary verbs include the present tense, the future tense, the future perfect, which still is talking about future realities. And last but not least, and this one I'm going to get to in a second, the true perfect. The true perfect. That one's really confusing for students. So I'm going to come back to that in a second. So the present, the future perfect, and the true perfect. Secondary or historical class verbs include the simple perfect, the imperfect, and the pluperfect. Okay, and I'm going to put those on a timeline. And this big line, hopefully you can see that in the middle, that's now. That's the present. And first I'm going to take my primary class verbs. Well, as any student knows, the present happens now. So now on the line would be right here. The present verb, or pardon me, the present tense can either be a simple present, I sit, or what's called a present progressive, I am sitting. Okay, so it kind of has this ongoing action. Okay, but it still starts at the present and maybe then continues on. Then we've got the future. Same kind of thing as the present. We could say, I will sit, I will be sitting. So the present, I sit, I am sitting. The future, I will sit, I will be sitting. The future perfect, slightly odd. It would be something like, it happens before a future reality. So I hope you can see that all right. We've got our future. The future perfect happens before something in the future. It's perfected. It's done. It's completed in the future. Okay? So, when I will be sitting, that's a future, I will have gotten my cookies and milk. That's something that's already been completed. So a future perfect happens before a future. A future perfect happens before a future. When we have landed in Dallas, or when we land in Dallas, future, we will have had bad airline food or peanuts, I guess if you fly Southwest. So that would be the future perfect. We will have had. It's done. If we move into the secondary class verbs, you'll notice they are on the left side of this timeline. So that would be the future. And here's the past. First, the simple perfect. The simple perfect is your simple past tense. I ate lunch. Bam. I ate it. I'm done. Lunch was good, I guess. Let me grab my black marker. I ate lunch. Okay, and then we run into the imperfect. The imperfect is an interesting tense. It either is one of three things. It's an ongoing past tense. I was eating my lunch, and you can see it going on. I was eating. Or it can be what's called iterative or repetitive, happens again and again and again. I ate lunch every day, happening again and again and again. Okay, often that'll be dropped into the imperfect. And the third one is mood, how someone was feeling. I was happy. And just think of like when you're down, you know how like when you're down, it seems like it lasts forever? That's kind of the imperfect, right? The imperfect means not done, not complete. So things that happen again and again and again, or things that are in process of happening, or moods where maybe it feels like it's forever, you know, like when you're sick and like hours never move. Okay, so the simple perfect, completed, done time, or simple past action. I sat. versus I was sitting versus I was sitting every day in Latin class versus I was sad that I was sitting in Latin class. All right, and the last tense I'm going to put on this side is the pluperfect. And the pluperfect is just like the future perfect in that it happens before everything on its side of the timeline. The pluperfect, plusquam perfecto, which means the more than the perfect, or in this case, before the perfect. So if we take our example, I sat. After I got to Latin class, pluperfect, I sat down, perfect. Okay. After one thing is done, then the other thing, or before the one thing, the other thing. Before I ate my lunch, I made the sandwich, or I had made the sandwich. All right. Now, the trickiest tense to kind of lay out on a timeline is probably the true perfect. Okay, in a true perfect, we use these all the time. It's a combination of the perfect, an action in the past, but it's a perfect that has present tense effects. Okay. A great example, there's a song called I Have Always Loved You. And the lyrics of the song, don't you know I've always loved you? And what that word have in English does is it shows it's a true perfect. For example, if the song said, I loved you, you might say, well, that's past tense. It's not happening anymore. But when we say, I have loved you, it says that not only was it true in the past, but it's still going on in the present. So we call that the true perfect versus the simple perfect. Another example, I sat there all day. Well, that's in the past, but I have been sitting here all day. Okay, that's still going on, and I pity the fool, okay? So the true perfect brings it to the present versus the simple perfect that keeps it in the past, okay? So your primary system of verbs would be your present, your future, and your future perfect, and your true perfect, which takes a past reality and brings it to the present. Think of, then the secondary or historical class verbs would be your simple perfect, your imperfect, and your pluperfect. Okay. Hopefully that makes sense. I'm going to add one other category that sometimes people talk about with Latin grammar that can be confusing. When we talk about systems of verbs. Systems of verbs. When we talk about systems of verbs, we're not talking about the timeline, which you can see, like primary and secondary or primary and historical verbs, they're all about the timeline. When does it happen? When we talk about systems of verbs, we're not talking about when it happens. We're talking about how we build the verb. Okay, so here I talk about two basic systems. Those are the present system and the perfect system. Now remember, this has nothing to do with the timeline. You can forget the timeline. What this means is that these verbs build off of either the present stem or the perfect stem. So either the first or second principal part or the third principal part. Okay? So under the present system of verbs, think about, let's say, how you build the present active indicative. Okay? Amo, amas, amat, amamos, amatis, amat. I go to my first principal part or second principal part, depending on how your teacher tells you, and you build it right off that principal part, so the present tense goes here. Sure enough. Okay, now let's think about the future. Well, how do we build the future? You go to your infinitive, you drop your re, and you add bo bis bit or ace et, depending on the conjugation. Sure enough, that one's built off the present as well. So your future active indicative and passive indicative are present system verbs. But think of the future perfect. That is actually a perfect system verb, even though it happens in the future. So the future perfect is actually built off that third principal part. So in this case, amawi. Okay. Other tenses. Let me think. Oh, sorry. The perfect, whether it's a simple or a true, it doesn't matter. The form will still be identical. It's built off the perfect stem. So both perfects would go there. The imperfect. Now the imperfect is actually interesting. Again, remember, though it's on the past side of the chart or of the timeline, that's not what we're asking about here. What we're asking about here is how do you build it? And in this case, you go to your infinitive and you grab your stem or the imperfect stem. Amabum, amabus, amabat, ambabamos. Okay, so the imperfect is going to be built off that present stem. Last but not least, the pluperfect. Well, the pluperfect, we go to our perfect stem, we chop off the E, and we build from there. So sure enough, the pluperfect is going to go on the right side as well. So here you can see that although if we're talking about tense classification, primary class and secondary class, that's all scattered up here. This system idea, the present or the perfect system, that has everything to do with how you build it, not where it appears on the timeline. Okay? All right, well, I hope that's helpful as far as verbs go and prepositions. And thanks so much for your comments and enjoyment.